Back in my late 20s, I was working for a county office that mostly operated like a snail-paced, outdated machine. The highlight of each summer was the influx of interns. Some were sharp, most just wandered around pretending to be busy, and once, we even caught a couple making out in the supply closet. It was usually a mix of awkward college freshmen and a few high schoolers hoping to fluff their resumes. I never paid much attention to them, since they came and went like clockwork. That particular summer in 2016, though, we got one intern much later than usual. His name was Warner, and unlike the others, he was close to my age, probably late 20s. I remember thinking it was kind of nice to finally have someone in the building who didn't call My Chemical Romance old music. He was chatty, a little too energetic sometimes, and definitely had the social grace of someone who didn't know when to stop talking, but still, he was harmless enough. We'd share the occasional lunch or chat during breaks, and at first, I appreciated the company. It didn't take long, though, before his behavior started raising eyebrows. He was the kind of guy who'd waltz into the office halfway through the day with zero explanation, or sometimes just not show up at all. One afternoon, he actually strolled in at 3:15 p.m. when we wrapped up at 4:30. The office manager nearly blew a gasket and sent him home immediately. But nobody really pushed for disciplinary action, because, as I later found out, Warner's uncle had apparently greased some political wheels to get him in the door in the first place. So we were all kind of stuck with him. When I announced that I'd be leaving the job and moving out of state, Warner suddenly got weirdly clingy. Every day he'd drop some comment about how it sucked that we didn't have more time to hang out, like we were long-lost friends or something. It was awkward, but I figured it would all be over soon. I let it slide and didn't want to cause drama in my final weeks. Then one evening, he offered me a ride home after work. I usually took the bus, but coworkers offering rides wasn't uncommon, so I didn't think much of it. The car was a total disaster. Fast food wrappers, clothes, who knows what else. But I climbed in anyway. We drove for a bit, and he kept pestering me to get dinner with him. I eventually caved and suggested a diner nearby just to get him to stop asking. Dinner was fine. He talked a lot about music and politics, and while he had some odd mannerisms, nothing about the conversation stood out as especially alarming. It wasn't until we left and I asked him to take me home that things shifted. I gave him directions, and when we reached the turn for my street, he just blew past it, laughing. At first I thought he was trying to be funny in a weird way, but then he started in on how lonely he was and how much he valued our time together. The more he rambled, the more I realized I really didn't know this guy, and the only context I had for him was a government internship he wasn't even good at. I didn't want to push him or get confrontational, so I suggested we hang out a bit at the park near my place. He perked up at the idea, parked the car, and we sat on a bench talking. And just when I thought the situation had leveled out, he suddenly dumped his entire life story on me. Drug addiction, getting arrested for theft, struggling with depression. It was a lot. I nodded politely, but it was overwhelming, and I tried to change the subject by showing him pictures of my dog. Unfortunately, I accidentally flipped to a picture of me looking cute in makeup, and he latched onto it way too hard, commenting how photogenic I was. That was when he started spiraling. He began gushing about how we were so compatible, how he wished we had more time together, and then, completely out of left field, he admitted he was high at that very moment. He started rambling about scoring drugs the day before and apologized for saying too much. At that point, I was frozen. I had just let someone drive me around while under the influence of heroin. I tried to stay calm and told him I was tired and wanted to go home. That's when the crying started. Not the kind of crying you'd see after a breakup either. It was strange and theatrical, wheezy sobs with no actual tears. He kept calling himself a mess, and then turned around and started complimenting me, telling me how kind and understanding I was. I just stood there quietly, barely keeping it together. Finally, I told him I'd walk home since the park was close to my house, and I got up to leave. Then I remembered my lunch bag and sweater were still in his car. Trying not to spook him, I casually mentioned my stuff and joked he could keep my dirty Tupperware if he wanted. He immediately stopped crying, ran to the car, and unlocked it. I grabbed my things, and his whole demeanor shifted. He suddenly seemed calm and apologetic, offered to drive me home again. I agreed, but had him drop me off a block away from my actual house. I thought that was the end of it. A couple weeks later, I had officially left the job and moved cross-country. Warner would still text me occasionally, sending weird emotional messages about how much he missed me and how we could have been something. I didn't answer any of them. Then, in February, I got a message from an old coworker with a link to a local news story. The headline read, "Man dies from wounds in Riverside stabbing." At first, I thought Warner was the victim, but when I opened it, I saw his mugshot and realized he had been arrested for the attack. He killed someone. The articles called him a homeless man, which told me he probably spiraled after losing the internship and getting evicted. A few calls confirmed it. Right after I left, he'd trashed the men's bathroom, got fired, and went downhill from there. I try not to dwell on what might have happened if I hadn't handled things the way I did that night. But I'm glad I stayed calm and didn't provoke him. The summer I turned 15 was the hottest one I can remember. I lived with my dad in a quiet Swedish town, one of those places where nothing really happens, and everyone knows each other, especially on our street. I wasn't really into the typical teenage stuff. No parties, no sneaking out, no drinking behind the school building. I had a couple of close friends, a little crush on a guy in my class, and I spent most of my time reading or riding my bike around town. That summer, though, I decided to shake things up a bit, just a little. I had saved up and bought this outfit that looked like something the popular girls at school would wear. It wasn't anything too wild, just a white fitted tank top and platform shoes that made walking feel like a balancing act. I wore it once, just to try it out, not expecting it to change anything. But then the notes started showing up. At first I thought it was a joke. They were always tucked into the basket on my bike. Things like, "Looking good, sweetheart," and "Growing up fast, aren't you?" I figured it had to be one of the guys from school being a jerk, so I brushed it off and didn't tell anyone. I thought if I acted like I wasn't bothered, it would stop. It didn't. One morning, I noticed the flower beds under our windows had been trampled. I told my dad and he got concerned. It wasn't the first time small things had gone missing around the house, and he worried someone might be scoping the place out. He reminded me to always set the alarm if I was home alone, which I promised I would. Later that month, my dad had a work retreat up north. It was a big deal, 10 years running his own business, and he wanted to treat his staff. I was used to being on my own when he traveled. Our neighbors a few houses down, a retired couple, always looked out for me. They didn't have kids and kind of saw me as their honorary niece or something. That Saturday night, I'd been out late at a friend's house watching movies. I got home around 1 a.m., pedaling slow because the air was so warm and still. When I stepped inside, I immediately noticed the house felt off. Not in a spooky way, just something wasn't right. The alarm wasn't armed. I told myself I must have forgotten before leaving. Then, in the living room, I saw Mr. H., our neighbor from down the street. He was just standing there, holding a wine glass. He smiled and said, "Didn't mean to startle you, just came to check in." That might have made sense if it had been 7 p.m. and he hadn't smelled like a liquor cabinet. I forced a smile and said I was going to bed, but my stomach was turning. He followed me into the hallway, still talking. I could feel my legs start to tremble. He poured himself more wine, waved the bottle in my direction, and started talking about how much I'd grown up. Said I looked like a young woman now, and that the way I dressed was sending messages I probably didn't understand. I froze when he said, "I've been watching you for a long time." He stepped closer and said he was a nice guy, that I could trust him, that he'd be gentle. His hand clamped around my arm and I could feel how much stronger he was. He was smiling, but there was no warmth behind it. Just hunger. I don't know where it came from, but I found myself smiling back. "You like to play?" I asked. I don't even know how I said it without shaking. He led me toward the bedroom, not mine, My dad's room. As soon as he turned his back to go lock the front door, I slammed the door shut and twisted the lock behind me. That's when panic really set in. My bedroom had a window I could crawl out of. This one didn't, but it did have a landline. My fingers felt numb, but I managed to dial the only number I could remember, my dad's work phone. He picked up immediately. I told him what happened, whispering while the man outside the door started jamming something into the lock. My dad stayed on the line while calling the police, and then reached out to another neighbor, Mr. L, who used to be in the military and was known for being a bit of a vigilante. I stayed curled up by the bed, clutching the phone, listening to the sound of a screwdriver scraping at the door, and Mr. H muttering about what he'd do once he got in. Then came the sound of yelling. Mr. L had arrived. What happened out there was chaos. I heard crashing, punches, and a yell that still echoes in my memory. It wasn't until Mr. L called out through the door, asking if I was okay, that I allowed myself to breathe again. I didn't unlock the door until the police arrived. After that night, I stopped sleeping properly for a long time. Mr. H had been someone I trusted, someone who used to give me candy when I was little. He had used that trust as a mask. Later, his wife filed for divorce. I ran into her years after everything, and she said she'd always had a bad feeling about him. Said she never wanted kids with him because she was scared they wouldn't be safe. That sentence stuck with me for years. He died a few years back. Part of me was relieved. He can't hurt anyone else now, and I never have to see his face again. My summers as a kid were always kind of uneventful, just long stretches of time filled with cartoons, homework I didn't want to do, and overhearing way too much adult drama. The summer of 2002, though, was different. Way different. That one is burned into my memory for reasons I wish I could forget. I was 12 and living with my mom in a quiet apartment complex. She and my dad had split years before, and since then, her boyfriend had been living with us. He wasn't my favorite person, but back then, I didn't really understand why. I think I just got used to him being around, even when he did things that made everyone tense. Like once, when I was probably 9, we were all watching TV and he came home wasted. He stormed into the room, shouted something slurred and angry, then smashed the television with his bare hands. Glass everywhere, blood on his knuckles. My sisters and I were frozen. My mom patched him up and things went back to normal, like they always did. Fast forward to early 2002, my mom finally decided she needed space and left him. We packed up and moved to another place a few miles away. I didn't get it at the time. I felt like she was breaking up our family all over again, and I was too young to realize how dangerous he really was. I thought she was being unfair to him. I even remember hoping they'd get back together. Then August hit. I caught this awful rash around my side and felt pretty sick, so my teacher sent me to a doctor. The diagnosis was shingles, which I didn't even know kids could get. The doctor warned me that if it spread too far around my waist, it could cause serious complications. It scared the hell out of me, so I was relieved when I got to stay home from school for a couple of days to recover. That Friday, my mom had to go to work, so she got me up, made sure I had something to eat, checked on my rash, then tucked me back into bed before leaving. I dozed off and was half asleep when I heard something in the hallway. I figured she must have forgotten something and come back, so I called out. Except it wasn't her. Standing there in the doorway was her ex. He just appeared like it was no big deal, leaning on the door frame, asking why I wasn't in school. I told him I was sick. He nodded and launched into this whole monologue about how much he missed us, how sorry he was for everything, and how he wanted to talk to my mom to make things right. And me, being a dumb kid desperate for a happy ending, I told him I missed him too. I even told him I wanted them to fix things. Before he left, he asked me to promise not to mention that he'd come by. I told him I wouldn't, but the moment my mom got home, I told her everything. At the time, it didn't even occur to me to wonder how he got in. No key, no one opened the door. He must have used something, maybe a credit card, to force the lock. But I didn't think about that then. He had lived with us for years, so it didn't seem that strange. That evening I went to stay with my grandma for the weekend, a plan we'd made earlier that month. My dad picked me up and dropped me off, and by then I was feeling a bit better. Sunday rolled around, and my mom hadn't returned any of our calls. Her phone had been silent for over half a day. It was weird, but nobody really panicked at first. A family friend picked me up from Grandma's and brought me back to my mom's place, but the door was locked, and there was no sign of her. The law where we lived said someone had to be missing for 24 hours before police could break into their home, so we waited until Sunday evening. My dad, sisters, and I were all there when they finally opened the door. I walked in, grabbed my school stuff, and went into the bathroom. When I came out, I noticed something sitting on the hallway counter, my mom's dental prosthetic. She'd only had it for a few months and never went anywhere without it, so I picked it up and brought it to the kitchen where my dad and an officer were talking. The moment my dad saw it, his face changed. That's when I realized something was wrong. Something really wrong. We went back to my dad's house that night. Still, no word from my mom. Monday came and went, and we didn't go to school. Tuesday morning, I woke up and saw our local priest quietly leaving our house. That's when I knew. Later I found out that one of the neighbors had gone to the shared attic in their apartment building and noticed a door that was locked. A door that wasn't usually. No one in the building had a key to it, so they called the landlord to come open it. What they found inside still makes my stomach twist. My mom had been dead for 2 days. Turns out her ex had come back on Saturday afternoon. The last person she spoke to was my aunt. Right before hanging up, my mom said, "There's someone knocking. It's him again. I'll call you later." He used the same trick to break in, slipped something in the lock and walked right in like he still lived there. He killed her that night. He was arrested not long after, bragging about having done something stupid to a bartender. The trial happened the following April. My sister and I had to testify, but thankfully we didn't have to see him in court. I remember sitting in that cold courtroom, my dad holding my hand while I answered question after question about that day. He got 9 years for manslaughter. He only served 7. I heard he moved back near the area after getting out. I've heard so many people say I was lucky, that he could have killed me too. And sometimes I think about how close I was to that being the case. If my mom had stayed home that Friday, if she'd left the house a few minutes later, if we'd both been there when he returned, maybe neither of us would have made it out. To the man who stole my mom from us, and who doesn't deserve to have his name remembered, I hope we never cross paths again. I had just come back from a night shift rotation at the base and had a few days off, so I was staying with a buddy of mine, Trey, who worked with me in military security. He lived out near the edge of southern Oregon, where everything just fades into dense woods and dusty back roads. It was one of those late summer days that starts out blistering hot, but gets swallowed up by thick, thundercloud-heavy skies by late afternoon. With nothing better to do and the weather getting weirdly dramatic, we figured we'd drive into the hills, find some old forest roads, and let the truck chew up some gravel while we cooled off away from town. That part of Oregon is packed with abandoned logging trails, some still used by hunters and campers, but a lot of them are barely even roads anymore. Overgrown, wild, sometimes with old broken-down vehicles or rusted-out logging gear just left there to rot. Trey and I had this habit of picking a random road off the main route and just seeing where it went. This day was no different. We turned off onto a dirt path that looked like it hadn't seen traffic in months and started winding deeper into the pines and firs. After about an hour of driving, we hadn't seen a soul. Not a car, not a hiker, not even a squirrel. The road curved and we popped out into this wide open field, surrounded by dense groves of aspen trees. It was almost too perfect. Dead silent, not a breeze, just still. And in the middle of the clearing was this strange picnic table. It was bright orange, like construction site orange, and oddly big, like way bigger than what you'd ever see at a campsite or park. Trey drove closer and we both kind of leaned forward in our seats, trying to figure out what the hell it was doing all the way out here. I got out and walked over to it. It was nearly chest height on me, and the benches were just as oversized. I would have had to climb onto it to sit down. Definitely not made for casual lunches. While I was poking around the table, Trey called me over. He was still sitting in the truck but staring past the clearing into the tree line. Between the aspens, tucked just far enough back that you had to squint to see it, was a small faded tent. It was this ugly blue and green color, and something about it just didn't sit right with me. There weren't any trails leading to it, no signs of a fire pit, and there were no sounds, no zippers, no shuffling, no movement. It was like the tent had just been dropped there. Trey and I exchanged a look, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. Someone's in there, and they know we're here. We sat there for a few minutes, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to get back in the truck and drive the hell out of there, but another part wondered if someone needed help. It was such a remote spot. If someone had gotten hurt, they'd be totally alone. Against my better judgment, I started walking toward the tent. Trey kept the engine running, ready to peel out if something happened. As I stepped between the trees, the air got noticeably colder. I wasn't sure if it was the shade or just nerves, but something about the campsite made my skin crawl. There were backpacks scattered around like someone had dropped them in a hurry. Women's clothes too, dresses, tank tops, even a pair of heels. But no signs of a fire, no food, not even a sleeping bag laid out. Just stuff. It looked wrong. I turned around to get out of there and tell Trey, but as I started walking back, I heard him yell. I couldn't make out what he said at first, but his voice cracked with panic. I sprinted back toward the truck, branches scraping my arms, and when I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw what had freaked him out. A beat-up old sedan was blocking the road we came in on. Rusted out, dirty windows, and 3 people inside. 2 men up front, and someone slumped in the back seat. I couldn't even tell if the person in the back was awake. Trey yelled at me again and I bolted for the passenger side. As soon as I jumped in, he punched the gas, and we swerved into the clearing. The sedan tried to block us again, but Trey drove through a patch of brush and got around them. We didn't speak for a while, just kept checking the mirrors, half expecting that car to come tearing up behind us. But it never did. We made it back to the highway without seeing them again. Later that evening, I called the local authorities and gave them the best directions I could. A trooper followed up the next day. He said there was no sign of the tent, the backpacks, or any clothing, but the giant orange table was still there, exactly where we left it, like it had been waiting. Neither of us ever went back. It was one of those muggy summer nights in New England. Late August, skies heavy with fog, the air thick like soup. My boyfriend and I had spent the earlier part of the evening strolling around this little coastal town we both liked. The kind with a faded boardwalk, a few fried dough stands, and an old arcade that always smelled like popcorn and rust. After wandering around for a bit and grabbing some snacks, we decided to keep the night going with a drive up the shoreline. The roads were quiet. Visibility was garbage thanks to the fog, and we figured we'd pull into one of those little roadside parking lots that dot the coast and just hang out for a while. We picked one that was totally empty and tucked right next to a dune. It felt secluded, not sketchy, just quiet. We moved to the back seat to get cozy. Nothing crazy, just some messing around like teenagers, even though we were both in our 20s by then. Neither of us were brave enough to actually go all the way. Getting caught mid-act wasn't high on our bucket list. After the heat of the moment passed, we were just lying there, tangled up, listening to the muffled waves and the occasional creak of the car shifting its weight on uneven ground. Everything outside was just a blur of fog against the windows, and it felt like we were the only people left on Earth. I was resting against his chest, enjoying that warm, sleepy feeling you get after you've laughed too much and kissed too much, and I looked up to kiss him again. Just a quick peck. That's when I caught a glimpse of something through the fogged-up window. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was a face, pressed right up against the glass, eyes wide, mouth closed, no expression, just staring. I didn't scream right away. It was more like this choked gasp, but my boyfriend heard it and turned his head. Then he screamed. It was this weird, garbled noise, half surprise and half panic. The face vanished in a blur, and we saw someone sprint away from the car, disappearing over the dune and toward the beach like a shadow melting into the night. Everything after that happened so fast. My boyfriend was immediately throwing open the door, adrenaline kicking in, and yelling after the guy. Something like, "You freak," or "Come back here." But I was grabbing at him, telling him to stop, to get back in the car, to lock the damn doors. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely form words. But all I wanted was to get out of there and find somewhere safe. As we were freaking out, another car had pulled into the lot. Some guy with fishing gear, looked like he was setting up for some late-night surf casting or something. We ran over to him and asked if he'd seen someone running by. He said he had seen a shadowy figure book it down the beach, but he hadn't gotten a clear look. He didn't seem overly concerned, just sort of shrugged like it wasn't unusual out there. We ended up driving straight to the nearest police station, trying to make sense of what happened. We weren't hurt, nothing was stolen, but it felt like a serious violation. We filed a report, told them about the guy watching us, and they jotted everything down. They said they'd let patrol know, but we could tell this wasn't going to be followed up seriously, unless someone else had a worse encounter. On the ride home, my mind kept replaying that face. There had been this weird glow around it, not bright like a flashlight, but just lit up, like there was a screen or something. For a while I was convinced he had been recording us. That idea stuck with me for months. Maybe he was just some weirdo trying to scare people. Or maybe he was hoping to catch someone doing something he could exploit. I guess we'll never know. All I do know is we never went parking again after that. Whatever thrill we used to get from sneaking off to dark corners of the world completely disappeared after that night. One summer when I was around 15, I had to tag along with my mom, aunt, and grandmother to our family's lakehouse in New Hampshire. It sat tucked away at the end of this long, bumpy dirt road, way out in a quiet little cove surrounded by thick woods and steep hills. We only ever used the place in the summer, and it felt like everyone else in the cove was on the same page, just families looking to escape the city for a bit. Most of the neighbors were familiar faces, the kind of folks who'd wave if they saw you outside grilling or kayaking. It was the kind of place that never really felt unsafe, even though it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. That particular trip, I was feeling grumpy and gross. Some summer head cold had knocked me out, and I wasn't in the mood to socialize. So when my family decided to take the boat out for the afternoon, I told them I'd rather stay behind. I made a little nest on the couch with a blanket, a bowl of popcorn, and a movie, just trying to forget how miserable I felt. The house was quiet except for the sound of the old ceiling fan clicking above me and whatever movie I had put on. I wasn't paying much attention to anything else, just zoning out, trying to enjoy the peace. That peace didn't last long. Out of nowhere, I heard yelling, this booming, angry voice coming from outside, echoing around the cove. It startled me so badly I practically jumped off the couch, knocking popcorn everywhere. I peeked through the window, and this guy I'd never seen before was standing just beyond the porch, red-faced and dragging what looked like a half-dead pine tree behind him. He was yelling something I couldn't immediately make out, but as he got closer, I heard it loud and clear. "You left your Christmas tree in my yard again." It didn't even make sense. This was the middle of August, and our house, and all the houses in the cove, were strictly summer homes. No one decorated for Christmas here. We barely even came up during the fall. I was frozen in place, just staring at him while he dragged the pine tree up to our porch, shouting about how this was the last time we were going to dump our tree on his lawn. At first, I tried telling him he had the wrong house. I was nervous but tried to sound firm, reminding him this was a summer property and no one had been here in months. But it didn't matter. He wasn't listening. He started pulling the tree up onto the screened-in porch, and something about the way he moved, sudden and determined, sent me straight into panic mode. The screen door was unlocked, and the actual house door was wide open because it was such a warm day. I ran to the door to shut it, but he was right behind me. We met at the entrance, both of us reaching for the door at the same time. I think if my family's boat hadn't pulled into view just then, he would have gotten inside. But the sound of the boat engine must have startled him, because he suddenly turned and bolted back toward the woods, dragging that sad-looking tree behind him. When everyone got back, I was still shaking. We locked up the house, and I told them what happened, still trying to make sense of it. My aunt's face went pale when I described the man. She knew exactly who he was. Apparently he lived a few miles away and had wandered into our cove before. But that time, he had been polite, even chatty, just one of those odd but seemingly harmless locals. Back then, he was around adults, so maybe that changed the way he acted. But with just me home, a kid on her own, he was an entirely different person. I didn't stay there alone again after that. Even now, it creeps me out thinking about how quickly someone can flip from being eccentric to threatening, and how different the world feels when you realize you're not nearly as alone as you thought.